Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Cleantech, a roundup of the week's biggest stories you need to know in climate and clean energy in 15 minutes or less. Today is Friday, August 2nd, 2024. I'm Renewable Energy World Editor-in-Chief John Ingle. Jael Holzman from Heatmap will be joining us shortly. But for now, I'm joined by Cleantech PR veteran Mike Casey of TigerCom, who is wearing some very fashionable new frames on his face. You look good, Mike.
John, are you drunk?
No,
have you been drinking? You just complimented me. You said I was looking. You were implying I look youthful.
You do look youthful, but it's early in the day, so I know that afternoons are a little rougher. But for us right now, as we're recording this, no, you're good. And quick disclaimer, Mike, I've got a toddler within eyesight right now due to what a lot of parents know is the challenges of summer childcare. So if you hear some commentary coming from the corner, like you may be now, that's the reason.
Well, I think, John, the problem for our listeners is they will mistake your co-pilot for you because you sound a lot like him sometimes on the show.
And I whine. All right, so
that's why I want to add, we have a listener compliment. Jamie Presser, he wrote us to say, I enjoy your podcast. So I want to say thank you to Jamie for those kind words. And
and we want to.
He was speaking about you, John, not just me. I just want you to know that.
I very much appreciate that. And we've been getting a lot of emails from our listeners as well at rew@clarionevents.com. So you can send in your story recommendations and nominations for Cleantech of the Week there. Mike, get us started.
All right, sir. Story number one from Fred Dvorak, who we often cite on this show, the Wall Street Journal, the rush to shore up the power grid against hurricanes, heat, and hail. All right, John, you lit off.
Yeah, so this year, the power grid's reliability has been severely impacted by floodwaters, hurricanes, and extreme heat, and these types of weather events are only expected to get worse. Utilities like New York's Con Edison are seeking ways to protect their systems from extreme weather impacts. One strategy including adding switches to underground networks to limit the spread of any failures. Other companies in hot places like Arizona are asking vendors to make sure new components can operate at an average daily temperature of 122 degrees Fahrenheit rather than 104. And to prevent hail damage at solar farms, tracker companies are starting to add stowing capabilities, allowing panels to be tilted to a steep angle so that hailstones miss panels or glance off of them rather than a direct hit. Mike, your thoughts?
We talked about the irony here of climate change solutions technologies having to solve for the extreme weather that comes from the problem they're designed to solve. So it's a big problem for utilities, not just renewables only. And as we face a future with more intense weather events, solar developers have to adapt to the most extreme weather management, because that's what good weather management practices are going to be, is you got to solve for the predictable extreme. We've seen hail destroy solar panels, but the proper forecasting and stowing technologies can lower that risk. Renewables have scaled up so rapidly that they're now being built in riskier locations like hail zones. That's going to require extra planning, construction, operations, and maintenance steps to mitigate those risks. John, story number two.
Yeah, so our second story is by Justin Warland from Time Magazine with a story titled How to Avoid a Climate Backlash. This was a good one, Mike.
I think it was too. This is, in my mind, a piece that's fundamentally about the tension between consensus-based self-governance by people, of people, for people, and problems that have been brewing for decades and now are accelerating. Do we have the ability in our current government systems to get up to speed and solve a problem that is escalating in its speed and the size of its impact? And I think fundamentally that remains to be seen, because what we also know about our system of governance is it allows special wealthy interests like the fossil fuel lobby to push narratives that fetter solving the problem that they help create. John?
Yeah, so Justin makes a really good point here, too. To move forward with climate progress, we need to acknowledge the backlash and create strategies to address it. Many officials assume that the economic benefits of fighting climate change would convince everyone to support it, but climate policies can also cause economic difficulties, and those need to be addressed for the people that are impacted. And it's important to communicate this support as well. The biggest challenge may be getting climate advocates to admit when something isn't working. We know that this transition can be messy in spots, and we need to be transparent and forthcoming about that. Mike, your thoughts are your third story.
Brad Plumer, The New York Times. Energy companies turn to robots to install solar panels. This is kind of cool, John.
Yeah, and we've seen a number of developments on this front over the last year and a half or so. So on the show, we've talked about labor shortages in the clean energy industry. Predictions say that the country will need to nearly double today's number of solar workers to meet solar demand. But 44% of solar companies already say it's very difficult to find qualified workers. Now, energy companies are turning to machines to address the issue. And this week, the AES Corporation introduced a robot that can install panels on a utility scale solar plant twice as fast as humans and at half the cost. We know Terabase and some other companies are doing this as well. After months of testing, this robot will install panels at the nation's largest solar plus battery project later this year. And so far, it has installed about 10 megawatts of solar panels, enough to power 2,000 homes. And Mike, what I thought was interesting, especially interesting about this one, is AES developed that robot themselves instead of going out to a vendor like Terabase to say, do this for us. Very, very interesting from a vertically integrated energy company like that to just build the tech on their own. Mike, your thoughts?
I think this is a bigger, this is a part of the bigger AI trend in this industry. You know, AI is going to impact so much so fast, as the speakers I think at your conference in February talked about. And we've talked a lot about AI as a negative for climate change because it uses so much electricity, but there's also ways it's going to help the clean economy. So I think that the old saying, it's complicated. Fossil fuel companies in the US have already been using automation to cut costs, but since we've made the switch to automation, the number of workers in the oil and gas field has fallen by 40%. So the goal of automation in the clean energy sector is not to hire fewer people, but to do more work with the same folks, because it's just hard to recruit at the scale we need people. John, our fourth story.
Yeah, this one's from TechCrunch, titled Applied Carbon's Farm Robot Turns Plant Waste into Biochar to Capture CO2. So a lot of robots this week, Mike.
And I have to admit to a bro crush on biochar. I just am going to say that because I think it's super cool and underappreciated, elegantly simple technology. So earth science and robots experts at Applied Carbon turned to a centuries-old practice to potentially put away 2 billion metric tons of carbon each year, all while helping boost crop yield. They discovered a way to transform waste biomass into biochar that can store carbon for decades and make soils better. Finding the plant waste, getting it to a biochar facility, and transporting it back to farms is costly and energy intensive. So instead of that inefficient process, Applied Carbon would bring the facility to the farm, which I just think is so cool. If you think about CAFOs, producing a lot of animal waste. You've got farms that have got a lot of waste they produce. This is a great way to put all that to work for an absolutely wonderful, elegantly step forward that Brazilian families figured out several thousand years ago in the Amazon. John?
Yeah, so this is another way for the clean energy industry to use automation. It requires a heavy tractor and can cover about an acre per hour. Applied Carbon is working to increase its speed, and their recent $21.5 million Series A round should be able to help that. And scaling this will be tough because they'll need thousands of tractor operators in the field, but the company says, we don't want to be a fleet. We want to be more like a John Deere. So they aim to achieve scalability through efficiency rather than manpower. All right, Mike, our fifth story and our guest this week, a big story.
Jael Holzman from Heatmap, the climate case against the permitting deal. This is going to be a good one because, Jael, welcome. You're not a stranger to covering climate policy discussions. So we're bringing in a genuine subject matter expert here. Jael, we want people to read your story, but if they haven't, what's the bottom line takeaway you want them to have?
Sure. So the legislation that was voted out at this point this week in the Senate out of committee would expedite the permitting and approvals and planning for transmission and renewables. Those are clearly good things for decarbonization. However, I wrote a story explaining, I think coherently and with detail why so many in the climate activist community are opposed to legislation. And it is because language in the bill as part of the bipartisan deal to get it done would potentially lock in generations more of fossil fuel leasing, both onshore and offshore, as well as tie the hands of the Energy Department on at least partially restricting approvals for LNG export terminals, as well as erode federal authority over oil and gas drilling sites on private lands. It would no longer require sites on those lands to go to the federal government for applications for permits to drill, which is the phase in which the government asks for bonding. That particular one gets to me because it's like, well, you're going to drill on private land, and what if you go bankrupt? Then it's up to the state at that point to stop methane from puking out into the atmosphere all hours of the day. That being said, I've been, and that story has provoked quite a bit of discussion online on the website formerly known as Twitter. I've had back and forths with folks, and I don't know if the story will be out by the time this episode airs, but you can expect more reporting from me about the climate case for the legislation. I think that there's something to be said about the gamble here. At the end of the day, when you combine a largely all carrot, no stick approach to climate policy on the industrial front, which is the IRA and the infrastructure law, with a permitting bill that is all of the above, no sector specific, it trusts the marketplace to adequately address climate change. And I think that that's why we're seeing so often climate activists get at loggerheads with federal and state government officials who are trying to strike deals to quicken the transition. It's because climate activists would like to decarbonize and also see the U.S. not be a petrostate. And at this point, given the nature of our democracy and our politics, it may not be possible to do both at once. I think that's a fundamental disagreement that my piece gets at, and that my reporting in the future will get at, is that, I don't know what that portends for the future of agreement on dealing with climate when you have such key stakeholders at loggerheads, renewable energy developers and climate activists.
Yeah, and that was going to be my question too. You were talking about the forthcoming. Thank you, Arlo. My toddler's getting the short end of the stick during this podcast, so you will hear him chime in. He knows permitting is a big deal too. Jael, the initial reaction to this from the clean energy trade groups, ACP, SIA, was this is really good. It's about as good as we're going to get. Yes, there's some fossil stuff in there, but the rest of it is so good for us that we're going to take that piece of it on the chin. What is the response from the climate side to those kinds of statements? Because even members of Congress, Senator Wyden, who has obviously been leading a lot of this push for decades, came out with a release yesterday, I think, opposing the permitting legislation, even though he's kind of the godfather of what eventually became the IRA and big wires and all of these things. So curious if you're hearing any initial response to the positioning by industry groups.
So where my reporting sits today is that, once again, there's a fundamental difference between renewable energy developers, wonks who draft up decarb charts, and climate activists. Each constituency has their own unique ideology that I think is fundamental to their differences, right? So, I had a conversation with a strategist who works with environmental NGOs yesterday for a forthcoming story about the legislation, and we discussed how, climate activists are not like developers in renewable energy, and that renewable energy developers are less interested in seeing a wind down of fossil fuel usage as much as they are interested in seeing more deployment of renewables. I think the problem that climate activists have with that is that that's more of everything. And that's not the position of activists who are quite ideologically opposed to more of everything. climate activism, environmental activism is not a mission of abundance. It's one of conservation. And so, that you have this deep disagreement and divide about capitalism and our current governance structure, not necessarily just disagreement over a couple of pieces of one bill. This is something systemic that can easily be traced from the halls of Congress to fights over individual offshore wind projects, fights over renewable energy development in the West, solar projects getting in the way of endangered species habitat and the like. This is a disagreement that I was recently hired by Heatmap from Axios. Heatmap's mandate for me is to cover risks to the energy transition. In my opinion, one of the biggest risks to the transition is a failure to get a social license to operate. It's a failure to get the buy-in from those on the ground who are most likely to oppose the project. I worry about where this legislation will take us, because if these two sides are in disagreement, it has a higher likelihood to stall things than to quicken the pace of transition, which is on net bad for the planet.
Boy, Jael, we could just go on and on. I'm telling you, this is a very rich area, and I'm glad you're on this beat. But we're just about out of time, John. We need to go to our Cleantecher of the Week.
Yeah, we don't have a Cleantecher of the Week this week, Mike, so I think I'm going to award the 2-year-old Arlo Engel that's next to me really being patient while Dad yells into a microphone. And there he is. So thank you to Arlo for waiting around for me to talk about the top stories.
All right, listen, I want you to just take Arlo aside to tell him we appreciate his tryout today to be a third co-host, but it's not his time. He needs to play minor league ball a little bit before he moves up to these major leagues.
We'll work on it.
All right. I just thank you. And by the way, did Clarion send you that caviar I told them put in your Star trailer? Because I'm tired of all the stuff they put in mine. I'm like,
no, not yet, but
I'll get on that.
Thanks.
Appreciate that. I'll get on it. I'll call the CEO. All right. Jael Holzman, we love having you on the show. Thank you very much. And we want to thank our wonderful producer, Brian Mendez, Claire Querin, and Alex Peterson helping put these stories together.
Yeah, and please subscribe, give us feedback, and share in those story recommendations. And we will see you all next time.
All right. Take care. See you, John.
He's saying, do this one. All right. Thanks, guys.
Take care.